This is the Louie Tee Network.
In the L.A.B room.
Exclusive.
Welcome, you are in the lab room. I'm your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me here on this program. In the lab room, exclusive franchise tag edition. Tag. You're it. So, let's talk about the franchise tag. Yesterday, Monday, March the 3rd, at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time was the deadline for National Football League teams to designate a player as a franchise player or tag them with a transitional tag. You had the option to tag them, and I'll talk about the various tags and how they are used, or you had the opportunity to elect to not tag them and try to work out, because you still have until March the 8th to work out a long-term deal with free agents that are on your football team. Now, after that March 8th period, talks are broken off and they officially become free agents. Now, they can't talk to other teams quite yet until the 11th. However, your time to work out a long-term deal is officially over. The clock is up. And now you've got to cross your fingers and hope that you don't lose guys that you covet on your football team. So let's talk about the franchise tag and who received the franchise tag. There was a league low 4 franchise tags handed out, and it hasn't been this low since 2006 when there were only 3 handed out. So that goes to show you teams are being a little bit more cautious. I think some of that has to do with the amount of money that is having to be paid out to these guys. With the cap being raised, the number for the franchise tag has elevated as well. So, and it didn't go up by a lot, but it went up by enough to kind of scare some of these teams away. And again, when you think about the franchise tag, you're thinking about a portion of your salary cap being eaten away by one player. And I think that's what scares the teams off the most about designating players as a franchise player, slapping that tag on them, is because you have to really make a calculated decision. How many holes do you have to fill in your roster? How much money do I have? How much is it going to cost me to franchise this one particular player? In some cases, like the Redskins, you've got $30 million worth of cap space, and Brian Orakpo is going to cost you $11.45 million. That's over a third of your cap space for the upcoming offseason. So that's a huge investment in one player, especially when you have some holes to fill. So it's a huge decision. But let's talk about who was franchised. So you look at Jimmy Graham. Let's start there. Probably the most sought after free agent in this year's class if he were to hit the market. Of course, the Saints aren't stupid. They're not foolish. They're not going to allow that to happen. They slapped Jimmy Graham with the franchise tag last week. They got that out of the way and said, hey, you're not going anywhere. You're a Saint. We need you. You're a part of this offense, a huge part, the biggest part of our offense. You're not going anywhere. Slapped him with a non-exclusive franchise tag. What that means, okay, so there's exclusive and non-exclusive. Exclusive means no other team can sign you. You're off limits. That particular player is off limits to the rest of the league, and now you have a chance to work out a long-term deal with that player. If not, they sign that tender and they're going to be on a 1-year deal, being paid the average of the top 5 players at that particular position of the player in question. So in Jimmy Graham's case, he's a tight end, but he wants to be designated under the wide receiver tag. As we all know, the wide receiver number is a lot higher than the tight end number. We're talking about over $4 million worth of potential money on the table for Jimmy Graham if he is to be able to be designated as a receiver. So his guys, agent, handlers are going to push for him to go ahead and try to be designated as a receiver. He's looking to be paid somewhere in the double digits in terms of how much that franchise tag would be for a tight end versus a receiver. So he's looking to be a wide receiver. Saints want to pay him the tight end tag money. Of course, it's a lot more friendly for them against the cap if he is designated as a tight end. I think Jimmy Graham, you look at him, he splits out wide more so than he does line up in line as a regular tight end. I think he splits out something like 60% of the time. So I could definitely see him trying to get that wide receiver and him actually winning that if it were to go to arbitration or something of that nature. So look for Jimmy Graham to be a guy that probably gets that wide receiver designation if they can't work out a long-term deal. But he got a non-exclusive franchise tag, which means he can be signed by another team. Now, the Saints still would have an opportunity to match that deal. However, if the Saints elect not to match the deal that he signs, and it's called an offer sheet. If he decides that he signs another offer sheet with another team and the Saints don't match, they have 5 days to match, and they don't match, the Saints would then receive, in compensation for him departing, 2 first-round picks from that team that elected to sign Jimmy Graham to an offer sheet, which essentially means no team is going to give up 2 first-round picks for anybody. That's just not going to happen. And so signing a franchise tag or slapping a franchise tag on a player essentially means that player is yours. He's not going anywhere. And so Jimmy Graham is going to be a New Orleans Saint. You look at another franchise tag. Carolina Panthers defensive end Greg Hardy happened right around the same time that Jimmy Graham franchise tag happened. He too has a non-exclusive designation on him. Doesn't matter, however, he's already signed his tender. He was slapped with the franchise tag last Friday. By Tuesday, he was already in Carolina signing that deal. So he is going to be a Panther for at least 1 more year. If they can work out something long term, then they'll tear that up and he'll have a long-term deal in hand. But for right now, your guy in Carolina, Greg Hardy, is going to be back. A lot of the fans were saying, hey, release the Kraken last year. Release the Kraken. And then when the offseason came, they said, release the... Well, wait a minute. Sign the Kraken. Sign the Kraken. So he is going to be back in Carolina at least for 1 more year under that defensive end franchise tag designation. You look at another franchise tag handed out, and Brian Orakpo and the Redskins, they went back and forth. They couldn't come to some sort of agreement on a long-term deal. And so the Redskins, you heard the reports Sunday night, they're mulling over the decision whether to slap him with that franchise tag or just to allow him to hit the free agent market. Again, I talked about that at the top of the show, how much it was going to cost to franchise tag a guy like Brian Orakpo. But look, it's been a lot made of that situation with Brian Orakpo and the Redskins really not holding on to homegrown talent. At me being a Redskins fan, I can attest to that. I could tell you this or I could tell you that about how I feel about the move. I will say this. It was probably a necessary evil, and that's a lot of money to invest in one player. But again, when you have a track record of not paying your guys and not keeping your stuff in-house, sometimes it's more about the statement that you're making than the actual money that you're handing out. And I think that's what this situation was about. Making a statement to other players in the locker room that, hey, if you go out and you play your butt off, you too will be rewarded with a contract here in Washington, not elsewhere. So I think it was more to do with that than actually paying Brian Orakpo what he is worth on the market. Now, let's see if the Redskins can work out a long-term deal with him, because I don't expect him to sign that tender anytime soon. But he also was slapped with a non-exclusive franchise tag, which means he can sign an offer sheet with another team. Redskins would have 5 days to then match. If they don't match, Redskins would receive 2 first-round picks in compensation from the team that he signed the offer sheet with in exchange for Orakpo leaving and signing with that other team. So he's been slapped with that tag. They're still looking to work out a long-term deal, but in the meantime, Brian Orakpo isn't going anywhere. He'll be a Redskin for at least 1 more season. You look at another franchise tag You don't hear this often, but last year a punter got it in Pat McAfee in Indy. This year a kicker, Nick Folk, got it from the Jets. Franchise tag for Nick Folk. No one's going to sign him, so the Jets slapped that non-exclusive on him. He's not going anywhere. No one's giving up 2 first-round picks for Nick Folk, so pretty safe to say he'll be back with the Jets for 1 more year. Doesn't cost a lot to franchise a kicker, a little bit over $3 million, and so Nick Folk was clutch for the Jets last year. They wanted to make sure that he was back again. And you know how tenuous things can be with kickers. 1 year they're up, the next they're down, so it's not really that bad of a deal to get a kicker back for 1 more year. But again, a lot of teams don't like paying kickers $3.4 million, which is what the franchise tag is around for Nick Folk. So he's going to be back as a New York Jet. Nick Folk was slapped with the franchise tag. So now you look at some other tags that were handed out, the less publicized tags. Okay, so these aren't franchise tags. These are transitional tags. What transitional tags are is the ability for the team to match any offer sheet that the player signs with another team. Now, this is the difference between a franchise tag and a transitional tag. There is no compensation for a transitional tag if the team doesn't match the offer sheet that the player signed with the other team. Then that player is allowed to leave, and that team does not get any compensation for it. So there's a little less risk involved by a potential suitor to sign a player when it's a transitional tag versus a franchise tag. Now, the only benefit to a team for slapping a player with a transitional tag versus a franchise tag is that it's a little bit less money, right around $2 million less at each position for a transitional tag versus a franchise tag. So in the case of Brian Orakpo, if the Redskins were to slap him with a transitional tag instead of a franchise tag, instead of that $11.45 million, be more like $9.45 million. So that's what the transitional tag does. It brings the cost down for the team just by a little. So it makes it a little bit more cost friendly for a team to slap that transitional tag, and you still get the opportunity to match any deal that another team may throw at the player that you want back in question. So let's talk about 2 players that received the transitional tag. First up, Alex Mack, the secret world of Alex Mack in Cleveland, the center that I think would have been one of the most highly sought after free agents on the market had he been allowed to test free agency. He's now probably going to remain a Cleveland Brown. Now again, transitional tags don't scare off other teams like a franchise tag does, because there's no penalty from another team coming in and offering a contract to X said player, in this case Alex Mack. So the Browns, what they're trying to do is essentially gauge the market for Alex Mack. If another team signs him to a deal and he accepts that deal, signs the offer sheet, the Browns have 5 days to match that deal. And of course, with them slapping him with this tag, they're most likely going to match any deal that some team signs him to, unless it's an egregious deal. And so no team wants to go and try to put a poison pill in only to have it backfire. So a team is going to sign him to an offer sheet. It's going to be a legit offer that they're going to make to Alex Mack that he accepts. And so it's not going to be a situation where a team can say, hey, we want to poison pill the Cleveland Browns and make them spend $20 million a year on Alex Mack. So we're going to give him this ludicrous deal, because then the Browns can just say, hey, you can have him at $20 million. And now you're stuck because he signed the contract. You signed the contract. He's not going anywhere. Now you owe him $20 million per year. So it's not like someone's going to have an egregious deal out there. It's going to be a reasonable deal. And that's what the Browns are looking for. They're looking to see what his market value is. And if he signs a deal with another team, then they have an opportunity to match. In other words, Alex Mack most likely isn't going anywhere unless someone gives him an outrageous deal that the Browns feel is too much for their liking. So Alex Mack most likely is going to be back in Cleveland after being slapped with the transitional tag. You look at another player slapped with that transitional tag, and that's Jason Worlds, the linebacker out of Pittsburgh. came on at the end of the season last year as an outside linebacker, lit it up toward the end of the season. Steelers did not want to let him go and test free agency, and so they slapped him with the transitional tag. We'll see what his value is out on the market, and if he gets a deal, an offer sheet that he likes, he signs it. Steelers have 5 days to match to make sure that they don't lose their outside linebacker, Jason Worrell. So those are your tag guys right there. Those are the guys that have been tagged. Yes, all of them are it. Now, let's talk about some players that did not receive the franchise tag. And there are a few out there that I thought were going to get franchised, and some teams thought better of it and said, hey, we're going to allow you to hit the market. Good luck. Hopefully, we'll get you back. But if not, we just can't make that type of investment. You start at the top of that list with, of course, Jairus Byrd in Buffalo. It was reported Sunday night that the Bills offered this guy a huge deal to make him one of the highest paid safeties in the league for a portion of that deal. And he just didn't like it. He wants to be the highest paid safety throughout the duration of his deal. And so it did not work for him. And so he didn't sign the deal. Bill said, we're not franchising you again. We're not going through that song and dance again. So he's going to be allowed to hit the free agent market unless they can reach a deal with him before March the 8th. If they can't, he will be one of the most sought after free agents on the market come March 11th. You look at a couple of guys actually for one team in the Oakland Raiders. Raiders decided with over $70 million potentially under the cap, decided not to use their franchise tag on a guy that most think could covet some attention on the free agent market in Veldheer. Here's a market where we're talking about tackles. We know left tackles come at a premium. Raiders have gotten a lot out of Veldheer, a lot of value out of this guy for not a lot of money. And so now it's time for Veldheer to get paid. Raiders could be making a huge mistake by not making sure that this guy is back on their roster. He hits the free agent market. There might be a deal out there that the Raiders deem to be too much for his services. He might not be back in Oakland. With the amount of money that the Raiders have, I can't see a situation and a scenario that happens where Veldheer isn't back in Oakland. But if you feel that confident about you getting him back, why not slap the transitional tag on Veldheer? I just don't understand why the Raiders didn't make sure they had some kind of plan in place to make sure that this guy is back on their roster. What about a guy like Lamar Houston? That's another guy that some argued and questioned whether he'd be slapped with the franchise tag in Oakland. I didn't really give a lot of thought to that argument because, to me, his numbers and production hasn't warranted him to be in consideration for the franchise tag. Here's a guy that is starting to come into his own, but has never approached 10 sacks in a season. He's starting to get pressure on the quarterback, but not to the extent where you feel comfortable tagging him and making him a guy that is going to earn $11 million in 1 year. That makes absolutely no sense. He's not a star in this league, not even close to one. You cannot give him that kind of money for one season of work. He's got to go on the free agent market and test it and see what's out there for him. And if nothing's there, or if the number isn't what he's looking for, then maybe the Raiders can come calling and he can stay in Oakland. You look at another player that I really thought was going to get the franchise tag, and that's Sam Shields in Green Bay. I thought the Packers were going to do everything in their power to hold on to Sam Shields. And I thought that this was going to be a situation where they would work out and strike a long-term deal before this deadline even approached. They didn't get it done, so I was expecting to hear Sam Shields being franchised by the Green Bay Packers. Instead, they said, nope, we're not doing that. Hopefully, we can work out some kind of agreement. They got to the 8th, like I've already said about a couple of other players, to work out a long-term deal. If that doesn't happen, Sam Shields is going to hit a very deep cornerback pool in free agency. But I tell you what, that's one of those premium positions in the league that you got to pay for. And if the Packers aren't careful, they could lose Sam Shields to another football team, because this is an ultra-talented guy. And you know how this league is going in the direction of the long, athletic corner that's rangy, that can make plays on the football. That description fits Sam Shields to a T. I think the Packers might regret not doing something with Sam Shields. Now, there's still time. He might sign a long-term deal with them before the 8th. But right now, it's up in the air. It's a very dicey situation. Sam Shields looks like he's going to hit the free agent market. What about Vontae Davis? Since we're on the topic of corners, in Indianapolis, Colts elect not to use the franchise tag on Vontae Davis. I think that was the right move. I feel like he's a really good corner, but I don't know if he's worth the franchise tag or not. Now, when you don't have anything elite at the cornerback position, as the Colts do not, you need to really hold on to your stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how the Colts play this out, if they're able to reach a deal with Vontae Davis before the 8th, if they're able to strike a deal with him before he really goes and talks to other teams to see what's out there for him. It'll be interesting to see what Vontae Davis is looking for and what he receives in free agency. Let's hope the Colts didn't shoot themselves in the foot by not doing something to ensure that they would have first dibs on Vontae Davis. You look at another corner. We're on the corners, so let's continue with that trend. Alteron Werner. The Titans made it very clear, abundantly clear, early in free agency, or excuse me, early in the offseason, that he wasn't going to be franchised. And so they've already invested a lot of money in McCourty. So it was kind of a matter-of-fact situation, like, hey, we've already spent a lot of money in our secondary. We just re-signed Bernard Pollard. We're not going down that road with you. If we can work out something, great. If not, go ahead and hit the market, see what you can find out there. We just can't afford to divulge any more money. We've got a lot of young corners that we're trying to develop. We'll just continue to develop these guys. And so we'll see. He's definitely going to hit the market. I do not expect Alteron Werner to be back in Tennessee. He's already come out and said, hey, no hometown discounts. What's a hometown discount? The Titans definitely won't receive one of those from me. I'm looking to get paid. More power to you, Alteron Werner. How about another corner? I mean, you see the guys that we're talking about are all at certain positions. And we know the premium positions. Quarterback, left tackle, cornerback, defensive end / outside linebacker. Those are the positions that most likely will be franchised because those are the premium positions in the National Football League. Those are the ones you got to pay the big bucks to because those are the positions that impact the game the most, more times often than not. So you normally see those positions being the ones that are franchised. You saw the tight end position that is really starting to climb the charts as far as the hierarchy in the NFL, with the tight end position being such a hybrid position and guys really making their impacts being felt at the tight end position. That's starting to climb the hierarchy in terms of franchising guys. We saw Jimmy Graham get franchised. We saw Jared Cook be on the verge of being franchised last year by the Titans. So tight end is slowly climbing up the charts in terms of importance, but it's still not quite there yet. Everybody doesn't have one of those hybrids, but when you do, you want to hold on to them. But we're still at the cornerback store. We're still at the cornerback market. Patriots and Aqib Talib. We know the Patriots aren't a team that's going to go out and use the franchise tag that often. And with them not having a lot of cap space, wouldn't have been in their best interest to franchise tag a guy like Aqib Talib. They're really trying to work out a long-term deal with this guy. But if he hits the market, they might not get him back because of their cap situation. They don't have a lot of money to spend. So it is imperative that the Patriots, if they want him back, they work out something with him immediately and don't allow him to test the free agent waters. You look at Eugene Moreau out in Baltimore at the left tackle position. Ravens traded for him in the middle of the season. Absolutely love what he brought to the table, and they want him back. And left tackle is one of those positions that you got to have solidified in the National Football League. And if they let Eugene Monroe hit the market with all of these left tackle starving teams in the league out there, they could easily lose the services of Eugene Monroe and watch him become one of the highest paid players in this free agent market. So they need to work something out. They should have put something on Eugene Monroe, whether it's a transitional tag or the franchise tag. They should have done something to really give themselves a chance to have him back on their roster, because now you've already invested a pick in him by trading for him during the season. You could lose that pick and lose the player if you don't re-sign Eugene Monroe. So it would be a double whammy for the Ravens. They can't get Eugene Monroe back in free agency. So it'd be in their best interest to sign him to something before March the 8th. Because if he hits the market, there are going to be a lot of suitors out there with a lot of money ready to break Eugene Monroe off. And the Ravens simply don't have the capital necessary to offer him the deal that some of these teams that are starving for left tackle help can offer him in the free agent market. So Ravens better get busy trying to re-sign this guy before it is too late. So that's going to do it for me here in the Lab Room Franchise Tag Edition. Tag, you're it. Teams have till March the 8th to try to lock down some of these players. If they can't, March 11th, they'll be hitting that market, and chances are they won't get their stuff back. That's the harsh, cold reality of the National Football League off-season when teams are shopping at the market. That's going to do it for me here in the Lab Room. I thank you for joining me. Remember, it happens in the National Football League, whether big or small, we cover it all here in the Lab Room. Thank you for joining me. See you next time. Like the content? Want more? Sub up.
In the Lab